So the office holders that we have had over the last 50 years of existence of Nigeria, would you say that there is not a single one of them that you can look back and say has got a vision to move Nigeria to the next level, and that's why we're where we are?
Look, let me tell you what I perceive. The biggest problem we have is, to be president of Nigeria is to preside over a huge distribution agency and with networks. Now, and I said it,
money or
look, listen. I said it the other day.
Petrodollars.
Look, I said it the other day that the Nigerian president is perhaps the most powerful human being in the whole world.
Wow.
Yes. Don't tell me about Obama, because Obama cannot write out. Obama cannot dash you the kind of things that a Nigerian president, if he wanted, can dash you. All right. If a Nigerian president wanted you to own Channels Television tomorrow, it is possible. Now, this kind of unregulated environment, which is also, it's not about good people or bad people, is that you really have an environment that is making it very difficult for good people to operate functionally. Now, it's okay to blame a president. A president does not run the judiciary. It's okay to blame a president. A president does not run the media. So I'm not saying that these people have not done well. But even the fact that we as a country lack the capacity to sequence the achievements, because as I've often said, we are the only country that progresses backwards. We progress in reverse. The president of Nigeria,
contradiction in terms, progress
backward,
because the best Nigerian president is the one that has already gone. They will abuse Jonathan today, but when Jonathan comes and say, Jonathan was not too bad after all. The other day I saw a cartoon in The Nation. And this guy says, the cartoonist said that the last governor of Bayelsa left 5,400 and something naira in the bank. And the cartoonist said, you are lucky, because we've got into our mindset, we become so mentally distorted that if somebody said, our governor tarred, my friend Pt.2 was telling, he said, if they say our governor tarred 5 kilometers of road in 8 years, you say, oh boy, you are lucky, 5 kilometers, no be small thing. That is where we are.
8 years.
So at the end of the day, frankly, you can say that it is really not the fault of those who govern Nigeria. The real question that all of us have to answer is, how is it that a country that is so well endowed with human resources, do you look like somebody who is waiting to be guided by anybody? With all the technology, with all the opportunities that are available to us, do we look like people that need to be led in any direction? What we're really, the essence of leadership is just to create an environment that will enable different people in different parts of Nigeria to do what they know how to do best. Whether it is farming, whether it is fishing, whether it is banking, and so on and so forth. So again, because of our experience with the military, this is why every time we talk about leadership, everything heads to the table of the big man. And as I said, the other day, one of the presidential aides was saying that the president of Nigeria has got so much power and he's not using even 10% of the power. But when these kids were killed in the US, now it was interesting to hear what Obama had to say. The kids that were killed in the school in Connecticut. Now, Obama said, I'm going to use every power that is available to me as the president to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Of course, in the end, it's only God that can stop certain things, but power is meant to be used rightly. So we shouldn't be talking about the fact that our president has so much power and mercifully he's not using the power. It is that to get this great country called Nigeria, in place, it's like a man driving a trailer. You can't turn in a roundabout if you're driving a trailer the way you want. You are carrying huge human resources, but also people with incredible capacity. And for me, really, the critical point is for us to take our eyes away from asking what our president can and should do for us, to taking a little bit of that power ourselves and doing what we can do best. And of course, you might tie this up to the fact that we probably don't have the architecture, the infrastructural architecture to support individual initiative, but that's a different thing altogether.
So, Bishop, the issue of corruption has been a big issue with Nigeria, and from day to day, our sensibilities are shocked more and more by the varying degrees of corrupt things that are going on in our society. What are your thoughts about the fight against corruption, which this government is making a huge song and dance about, which many people say they're not seeing any evidence of?
So, and if I can add to that, I've got Kojo Mensa on Twitter who just said that I would like to ask Bishop Kukah, if he had one opportunity to speak to President Jonathan about corruption, what would you tell him? If you can add that to the question by Alera.
I mean, I don't lack the opportunities to speak to President, but there are people who are paid to do that job. But let me try and answer your question. First of all, I studied philosophy, and I worry that even the language we employ is not correct. The whole idea that we're talking about fighting corruption, I've never believed that corruption is something that should be fought. Let me tell you something that Maya Angelou once said. She said, if your hand is in the mouth of a lion, and you know that the lion can chop off your hand at just one snap of its teeth. He said, okay, your hand is in the mouth of a lion. So why don't you use one hand to stroke the mare of the lion? Because as you are stroking his mare, the lion is saying, you know what, if this guy had two hands, he'll actually be scratching this other side. So as you're stroking the mare of the lion and it is shaking, you're also gradually trying to pull out your hand. So it then comes to a point in which the lion realizes that it is in his interest actually that you have two hands, so you can continue to stroke his mare. There's what economists call, and I'm not an economist, but they talk about incentive compatibility. That you have to create a kind of incentives that enable even the criminal to want to come to the table. Now, you're talking about fighting corruption, and we are all talking about this fight. Look, people no longer fight lions, they tame lions. Okay? There are people who tame snakes. Everybody is scared of snakes, but there are people who have learned to tame snakes. I'm not talking about taming corruption or containing corruption, but I'm saying let's even analyze and figure out what exactly are we dealing with. Because clearly in this country, sad as it may sound, corruption is the only thing that works. It's what gets you into university, it's what gets you into elective office, it's what gets you to pass an examination, it's what gets you a job. So if we at least agree on that point, we can then design the rules of engagement. But to continue to behave and pretend as if somehow we have a bunch of politicians who are just so thoroughly corrupt and that we should try and get rid of them. We've not laid out the background, the basis for the engagement. Because, you see, certain environments such as the ones we have lend themselves to certain contradictions. If you live in an environment of such severe scarcity, where there's no water, where there's no light, there's what is called in political science, somebody is referred to it as the instrumentalization of failure. That is that when things are not working, that failure has become so instrumentalized that it is actually a tool of empowerment. So that if people living in a particular location have no water, the man who is selling water is making a lot of money. If the roads are not working, it is because somehow somebody who is, doing something different is making a lot of money. If the people selling generators are making money from this and they become an empire, it's not in their interest that Nigeria has electricity. So, in my view, you can use these permutations and you refer to them as corruption. But the critical question that you have to address is what kind of incentive are you going to, what incentive are you going to give to the man who has been selling water and making a lot of money? Whether you negotiate with him or whatever, you have to find a way out. I mean, in Chicago, for example, Al Capone, when Al Capone was running his empire, he was an alternative government. Al Capone people were being killed on the street. You couldn't take him to court. But when somebody decided he had to make sure that Al Capone goes on trial, they decided we're going to try you. But they tried him for tax evasion. not the people he had killed. So, but then the problem with Nigeria is that really it's like who's going to bail the cat? You go to the judiciary, people believe you. You're not likely to get justice. I mean, I listened to Chamberlain and Sulaiman and Maupe yelling the other day about the man with the 32 billion, and I could see their sense of revulsion. But, all the institutions have become arthritic. Nobody seems to have the moral authority left to fight. So, really, rather than talking about fighting corruption, in which leads to setting up institutions, and all of us think that it is these institutions that will, quote-unquote, fight the corruption for us, it's just not going to work.
Okay, so the point that was raised by Kojo Mensah, though, on Twitter, what would you say to the president about corruption?
I will say to the president that, first of all, let us understand what corruption is doing successfully that he is not doing. There must be something, people talk about sin and they talk about the devil. The devil is not if the devil were a bad man, he would not have so many people following him. There must be something, I mean, if the devil were not a bad man, the devil must be extraordinarily handsome for all these women to be following him. If he's a woman, must be extraordinarily beautiful for all these people to be following him. If you're going to win people away from the devil, you must know what it is that the devil has offered that are not offering. Clearly, my dear, let me tell you what I think is basically and philosophically wrong with this country. It is that the president, governors, politicians have failed to understand that Nigerians now have alternative parents. All right? What I mean is, if your wife or your husband, if your husband comes home and says, I've had dinner, don't worry. He says, I'm going to have breakfast, don't worry. I've just had lunch, don't worry. You as a wife, the first thing that should come to your mind is not the economics. It might make economic sense if your husband is not eating. You might say you are saving money, but you are in trouble. Because you have to find out where is he eating. What is happening now is that there are other competing and contending institutions that have taken away the loyalty of Nigerians. There are tribal clubs, there are all kinds of associations, there are alternative godfathers, because right now, you cannot tell me how do you get into a university in Nigeria? How do you get a job in Nigeria? It's not by filling the forms. Everybody knows that. How do you get promoted in Nigeria? Everybody has come to believe it's not as a result of hard work. So if you don't have a regime of compensation, a regime of reward, the problem is that you may be president of Nigeria, but you are presiding over people that they can hear you, but they are not listening. And for me, this is the danger. Because if people are driving on roads that were built by the people you are calling corrupt, if they are drinking water that is not provided by by their government, when the government calls them, whom are they going to listen to first? And this is why you now have a country that is literally heading in different directions. If I were president of Nigeria, the first thing I want to do is to secure the loyalty of my children. And you secure that loyalty by making yourself believable. Right now, president or governor or the minister of information say we're going to do this. People just turn the other page. Because overcoming this cynicism, the book I published in 1999 titled Democracy and Civil Society, the first chapter I called it Overcoming Fatalism and Cynicism. And my argument was that Nigerians had become so cynical and so fatalistic that to build a democratic culture, you have to design a mechanism for curing them of that fatalism in order for you to be able to, create, the kind of citizens that can deal with this fight. So it's not about giving, Jonathan Wild, single liners. It's really a question of whether the president of Nigeria can become more discerning to appreciate the fact that, if you're looking for people to deliver services, not everybody must be a card-carrying member of the PDP. When I was at the Kennedy School, that if a Democrat comes to power, there is almost intellectual hemorrhage, at Harvard, because some of the best brains will move to Washington. If a Republican comes to power, it will happen in Yale, it will happen in Princeton, because these people go there, they go to render their service, and they go back. I remember one of the women who was my teacher at Harvard, she was teaching terrorism, but she was a counter-terrorism expert. Now, have you ever heard of something like professor of counter-terrorism? Here we are. We're talking about terrorism in Nigeria. First of all, we can't agree on the definition. Secondly, We are appealing to all kinds of, we are still appealing this. Witchcraft involved, there are medicine men involved, there are prophets involved, there are prayer warriors involved, for things that are purely and simply scientific. You know, I mean, these things are not the result, they're no longer subject to conjecture. So if you think that we can, and people believe, people in high office believe we can pray away Boko Haram. It's just, this is not, look, two of the greatest leaders of the world today, Mandela and Obama. If I ask you, which churches do they go to?
We don't know.
We don't know. So we're not looking for this dubious belief in Nigeria that somehow all we are looking for is God-fearing people. Look, let me tell you, if I cast my vote, I'm a priest, I'm a bishop. But frankly, whether you
don't
believe
think we
in,
can pray away our problems?
we can pray away our problem. Indeed, it is a bit of an oxymoron, you know, to keep talking about God-fearing men. Because some of the most God-fearing people, not only are they, I mean, how do you measure God-fearing? Is it the size of the church? Is it there are people, this is really not the issue. And I've said it here severally, you know, I mean, you know the joke in northern Nigeria, where all these big people have their mosques attached to their homes, you know, and the joke is that they call them in Hausa, Allah Ganaka. You speak Hausa, don't you?
No.
Okay. Allah Ganaka, that simply means, God, here is your own. You know, that is, from what I was told, to build this massive empire. God, I've not forgotten you. You know, this is why I built this beautiful mosque. So, this is not, we're not running a seminary, okay? We're not running a seminary. We're running a country.